The last topic we're going to cover this term is cultural ecology or environmental geography. Cultural ecology is a concept that was introduced throughout the textbook in each of the chapters, and I decided to put it together as one topic to think about those interactions during this last week of the course. And so this is a bit of a hodgepodge. I'm going to talk about some terminology that's used to discuss environmental geography or cultural ecology, and then I want to talk a little bit about cultural ecology and agriculture, cultural ecology and economy, and cultural ecology and urban landscapes. So it's going to be a bit jumpy, so kind of hang in there. When we talk about cultural ecology, we're really trying to understand the interactions of humans and the physical environment. And so we're looking at how do people alter their physical environment, and how does the physical environment impact people. And this study of ecology is really difficult because it's multifaceted and it's very complex. One aspect of cultural ecology that makes it even more difficult to try and understand is that people do not always react and adapt and make choices based on scientific research. They often make decisions based on local custom, on historic belief systems, on their own personal experience. And so one way to look at this is there is an abundance of information supporting human impact as a major cause for global climate change. The science says that yes, there have been climate variations over the millennia, but the rate at which the climate is changing is unprecedented in the amount of change and in the time that it's changing, and this is directly related to human activity. But people really many people have a hard time accepting this belief system, and so, or this scientific fact, because of their belief systems, and that makes it very difficult to predict how people will react and to help them make good decisions. There was a study done several years ago in California to try and understand why people chose or didn't choose to buy earthquake insurance. This is a very active tectonic area. The science is really good right now as far as being able to predict earthquakes, and what they found was that people's choice in purchasing earthquake insurance was not related to the percent of risk or the time factor. It was related to their beliefs about earthquakes, and many people who had already experienced an earthquake felt they didn't need insurance because they lived through it, and they'd probably already experienced the only one they were going to experience. So that's kind of ostrich head in the sand a little bit. And then other people who had not experienced an earthquake yet didn't believe there was a real need to have earthquake insurance. So our beliefs have a huge impact on what we actually do in the world. And so that brings us to the idea of cultural adaptation. And this is trying to understand the ways that people alter their cultural activities in order to meet certain physical conditions. And we look at different adaptive strategies. And by that we mean, how do people provide for themselves as far as food, shelter, and clothing? For example, in the East Coast, it's very common to see houses made of brick. And in the West Coast, you see houses more often made of wood and less brick. And this has to do with just the physical properties of what the physical environment had to offer. And then at some point, brick houses over wood houses is determined by what is the local culture, what's kind of commonly built in that area. A way that people in places in China and in Japan grow rice is to terrace steep hillsides to get more arable land out of that, out of the environment. So we have many different ways when we look at the world and how people adapt their environment. Some cultural adaptation strategies are very successful and will support the growth of a culture, and some are not very successful and can support the decline of a culture. And I was thinking about the earthquake and then volcano adaptations or volcanic eruptions, and thinking that people who lived on the flanks of was it Etna, that I can't remember now, but anyway, people living in Pompeii knew they were living on the flanks of an active volcano, and yet since many people had lived there and had been successful, they chose to live there. Also, volcanoes are very fertile landscape, so when you're trying to grow food, it's good soil and full of minerals, and so it's a good place to grow food, but it's not always a safe place. We had people when Mount St. Helens erupted in the 80s who did not believe the science and decided to live and stay there, and were hugely impacted. Another thing to think about is that people are adapting to climate change, that in many places there are active changes being imposed on how you rebuild along a coastline, and some small island communities beginning to try and relocate important services inland and higher in elevation if they can. So one of the readings you're going to do is about is called The Vanishing, and it's really focused on what causes people to be successful in new environments, and that willingness or reluctance to change culturally. Environmental determinism is one theory that's been used to try and understand how people react to their physical environment. And this is a pretty limiting and not well accepted belief system, but in the past there was this idea that people were pretty passive and their physical environment caused them to behave in certain ways. So simply said, that mountainous people were considered simple and happy. People who lived in deserts were basically warlike, and people who lived in temperate climates were very industrious and very creative. And so this was a belief that really overemphasized the idea of climate and landscape on human behavior. At the other end of that continuum is the belief in possibilism, which says that there are many ways that people can adapt to the same environmental conditions, and that humans are very industrious and will offer many different choices. However, traditions and beliefs are going to limit those possibilities a little bit. And so we can see that, as I said before, even though you believe you're safe from an earthquake or a tsunami, those physical actions are much stronger than humans are. So the book goes into a discussion of sustainability, and it's really important to think about when we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about a long period of time. We're not just talking about sustainability for 10 years or 20 years or 50 years. We're talking about the land and the system and the way that we live being sustainable or usable in the same way for hundreds of years, for thousands of years, so that each generation is able to continue. And I love the word to thrive, and that's a very positive term. We're not just talking about people getting by, but we're talking about the human race continuing to grow and to thrive and to be healthy. And so when we think about sustainability and sustainable practices, we need to think about that long term. Are we using it up and we have enough oil from fracking for the next 50 years or 100 years, but that's not particularly sustainable for the next 1,000 years. So that brings us to the idea of renewable resources. And so when we talk about renewable resources, we're thinking about resources that can be replenished easily and comfortably. So trees are renewable, but old growth trees are not. So if we're looking at old growth forests, it's hard to think about those being a renewable resource in 10 years or 20 years. If we're talking about taking water from the aquifers, those are not renewable in many lifetimes. So we keep thinking about overfishing, deforestation, mining, and those are probably not resources that can be replenished. And then we have to think about, when we talk about renewable resources, the things that we do in extraction or in just the way that we live our lives that cause secondary impacts. So acid rain, the loss of ozone, and the impacts on environmental or on blah 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 urban systems. So I want to talk about sustainability in agriculture very briefly. So when we look at the world and the way that we're producing food right now, we have this, especially in developed countries, intensive agriculture, so agribusiness as a response to population growth. It takes I should edit these before I go. It's capital. Yeah. Large amounts of labor are involved, and we're talking about capital as in equipment, as in fuel, processing. So we have a very high impact on each acre of land, and so this means machinery, fertilizers, pesticides. And right now we being the United States, produce more food than any other place in the world. And then we have to think about, is that sustainable? And we're talking about sustainable again in terms of long term. Is there enough fertilizer, pesticides? Is there enough water that we're pumping from aquifers under the desert? Another aspect of agriculture and sustainability is this idea of desertification. So taking land that's productive and overusing it so that it becomes too salty, too dry, and begins to increase desert areas. And this is happening in many places in the world. So one of the new topics that people talk about a lot is the idea of biofuels, and I think there's a reading about biofuels this week, and I really want you to think about the impact of biofuels. People talk about them as green fuels. So we get energy from biological matter. So this means like you can grow algae and produce fuel from algae. We can produce fuel from corn, from palm oil. But while many resources think about this as a great replacement for oil and gas, or for coal, oil, and gas, we really have to think about what does that alter in the whole system. So one of the things that we saw in South America, I think predominantly Mexico, was that people were taking corn that had usually been used for food and using that corn for fuel. So the price of corn for food went up, corn for cattle went up, and that made food more expensive at the cost of cheaper fuel. And so one of the readings talks about this whole Brazilian palm oil plantations and all of the forest land that's being cleared in order to grow palm oil. And is that a good trade? Is that sustainable? So it's a really interesting problem as we begin to solve one technological difficulty. What is the impact of that? There's been a lot of discussion, especially I hear this around Oregon, is local food versus global food. And when we really look at that, we think about the cost of our food, when we look at the transportation cost, and what kind of impact that has. So there's a reading that I want you to take a look at that talks about the cost of food transportation. And it's just, I love this statement from the New York Times that talked about cod taken from the waters in Norway gets sent to China to be turned into fillets and then is taken back to Norway for sale because the production uh, is not happening in Norway, it's happening in China. It's cheaper to send it to China and bring it back. And it was interesting also, they had an example of lemons being brought from Argentina, where lemons are naturally grown in Spain, and the Spanish lemons were too expensive to pick. The cost of labor was too high. So it's an amazing thing when we begin to think about where our food comes from and how does that impact fuel and transportation costs. When we think about economic geography and ecology, again, we want to think about renewable resources and the replenishment, and this whole idea of industrialization being a major cause of deforestation, the use of lumber for paper and for other things that we have really caused a huge impact on the forests. One of the things that interested me when I first moved to Oregon was the Willamette Valley and how active it was as far as food production. So it was one of the major strawberry capitals, blueberries, corn, lettuce, spinach, and now much of that acreage has been taken out of food production and put into production for higher profits, as in wines and vineyards and ornamental plants. So, trees, bushes, landscaping plants. So the food that we used to grow here and be able to eat locally has to be brought in, and then the things that we're producing in Oregon are shipped out to other places. So we've really kind of changed our dependence on food and on transportation. So another result from industrialization is this creation of acid rain. So pollutants in the air from the burning of fossil fuels, from auto exhaust, you get sulfur oxides and nitrogen oxides, which mix with precipitation. Huge impact in changing the pH of just natural rain, enough so that there are many places in the United States and in northern Europe where the trees have been damaged. So you get acid rain deposits that actually kill forests. And then in many places in the northeast of the United States, you have what are called dead lakes, where the water in the lakes have gotten enough precipitation that's acidic, that is not allowed any fish populations to survive. So all of these are impacts of the way that we are culturally adapting to our environment. And the impact is going to be that the environment is going to cause us to have other adaptations. So when we look at economic geography, again, we can look at these export processing zones, and this is a map from your text, and it shows the location of these processing zones. So materials are shipped again to these areas of the world where manufacturing is taking place, and then the elements are then shipped out. And you can see that the location of these places, and here is a blow up of the border between the United States and Mexico, and this would be the site of hundreds of maquiladoras. And so what you begin to really think about, if we looked at the map of the Human Development Index, if we looked at the map of the GDP, where you could almost pinpoint places of low development, or countries that are developing also are places where there are many EPZs. And so I wanted to think about this as an example of environmental racism, where we're not really talking about races, but we're talking about minority places, or places where there are people who are living in less prosperous areas, and so these places have more pollution. There's much more environmental damage due to the economic activities that are happening. And you notice they're not happening along the U.S.-Canadian border. They're not happening as much internally to the U.S. So then we can move to urbanization, and let me move that back up, and to the urban landscape. And so one of the things that's happening is that urban areas are becoming very deadly places. As temperatures rise, what we see is an unequal rise of these temperatures in the city. So cities create heat islands, and there's a short video on urban heat islands that I want you to watch this week. So the temperatures can rise in a city 7 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit more than they are in the countryside. This is due to asphalt in the cities. It's due to tall buildings that create blockages of any kind of circulation, exhaust from cars, lack of trees, lack of canopy cover. All of these create these extra hot city centers, and this is an example or an image from the text showing a heat center in Qingdao, China. And you can see that the green are cooler areas in the countryside, red is hot, and then this would be the hottest place in the city. And there are places, if you look at some of the there was in 2007 there was a heat wave in many places in Northern Europe, and there were many deaths from just the exorbitant heat that built up in the city. We also get what are considered dust domes in the city. So we get these layers of pollution that get trapped by lack of circulation. They create fog, and these support of or creation of clouds and heat layers and dust domes over a city. So one way to fight urban heat islands, there's a great amount of research being done on tree canopies, trying to create as much green space in a city as possible. Many places in the world are looking at putting green roofs, alternate forms of transportation. However, green roofs are not completely a solution. In the news this week, there was a grocery store in Europe where there had been a green roof that wasn't built properly, that was actually too heavy for the building structure, and people were killed as that structure fell. So again, there's not always an easy fix to these things. So I want you to really understand about heat islands and alternatives to heat islands. So when we look at some of our adaptive strategies, there's quite a few. We do irrigation in the desert to make the desert bloom. And if you have Google Earth, look at Saudi Arabia. There's some amazing crop circles. There's some amazing examples of irrigation in desert areas. We have air conditioning. We grow tomatoes indoors. We have GMO foods, algae grown for food. So there's all of these ways that we're adapting to the environment, and we're adapting the environment to fit our needs. I found this online. Columbia University did an environmental sustainability study. They created an index, and so this is a little bit old. This was the latest one I could find. But it's like the HDI, where it's a composite, and basically what this map is trying to show is cities or areas in the world that are sustainable. And I'm going to read this to you just in case it's not readable on the video. It says the Environmental Sustainability Index quantifies the likelihood that a country will be able to preserve economic resources effectively and avoid major environmental deterioration over a period of several decades. So when we look at this, we can see that Scandinavia is very high. Canada's high. There are places in South America, Australia, that are high. The United States is not as high as some other places, but you can see Central America and Africa and Asia are on the lower side of being sustainable. So, is our industry-based way of life sustainable? Right now in Warsaw, during the UN Climate Change Commission, these many small countries are very angry that they are feeling the brunt of climate change, and they often believe that they are not the major contributors. And I know when you watched the Story of Stuff last week or the week before, it talked about the United States only being 5% of the population, yet we contribute a huge amount to pollution, and we use a huge amount of the world's resources. So there are many small countries that are saying, you know, we believe climate change is real, but we are not causing it, yet we're going to be the people that pay the biggest price for this in terms of human life and economic impact. And what are these large countries going to do about that? And there's a huge split right now about how countries like the United States, China, Russia are going to help deal with what they have caused. So just to summarize, there are 4 fairly short readings. Biofuels and food for fuel readings are very short. The boiling frog is a very short reading, and the vanishing is a little longer, but just a fascinating reading about cultural adaptation or lack of adaptation. Oh no, the Story of Stuff is for this week, so you'll read that. And then the urban heat island is very, very short. So there is no activity this week, and I will grade the quiz ongoing all weeks because the exam will open up for you on Monday. Monday night, the hybrid class will take the exam, and then people who are in the online class, the exam will be open Monday and Tuesday for you in the testing lab. All right, good luck.